Thank you.
I'll get started.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Hi,
Hey,
Miguel.
Nice to
Hi,
Miguel.
Miguel.
see you.
Hi, Miguel.
Hello. Hello. How are you?
Hi, Susan.
How are you?
Good. And you?
Hi, Sylvia. Mindy coming tonight?
We'll see.
Okay.
She's
You're on
around.
here.
How are you
There's
doing, Stuart?
Good. How are you, Charles?
I'm good, thanks, Gary.
You-
How are you, Miguel?
Oh, about tennis.
Fine, Charles. Thank you.
Joanne.
Hi, Susan.
Hi. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Sylvia. Hey, everyone.
I'm
Hi, everybody. Hi, Mindy.
You see me in the kitchen
Hi,
for a
Mindy.
change.
Hi, Mindy.
Hi, Susan.
Who else is here?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Linda's. And, let's see her.
Darlene's coming soon. Darlene is coming soon. Hi, Darlene.
That must be.
Uh, let's see.
Unfortunate, Darlene will not be joining us.
No,
Oh,
I'm
no.
sorry. I'm sorry.
Hey, everybody, how you doing? Good evening.
Hello. Hi, Hector. Hi, Hector.
Hello, how you
How are
doing?
you, Hector?
Good to see you.
Thank you, Hector.
Guarantees can we get from the authorities, whoever they
Hey, Layla. Hi, Layla.
Hi, Layla.
Hi, guys.
Layla knows where to eat. Good choice of Amy's bread.
Yeah.
I love it.
Joanne,
And
Joanne, how's your daughter? Tell her I said hello.
I don't see her. She's in Westchester.
Oh, okay. Well, I talk to Rabbi all the time. He's helping me with my husband. April will be 2 years. April will be 2 years.
I've never met the rabbi, to be quite honest.
Yes, I love Rabbi.
I'm glad he helped you. But
He does. He does. I'm supposed to have a surgery down the line. I have to go have a surgery in Long Island real soon. I just came back from the doctor today. Okay.
I might not stay for the whole thing. There's something I want to watch it.
So Joe, should I start?
I'll do a quick introduction
Okay,
for us.
great.
But yeah, I think we're good to go. But good evening, everyone. So thank you all for jumping on. I know we're up to about 30 attendees. I'm sure we'll have more people coming in. Before I introduce tonight's program, I did also have to take the opportunity to do a quick plug. But as many of you have seen, we are in the real heat of petitioning season. It has been lovely out this week. The forecast looks great. Always nicer to petition when it's nice out. So if you have petitioned before with CRDC, I would please ask you to reach out to our district leaders, Charles and Sylvia, to organize getting petitions and petition for us. If you've already taken them and you're just filling them out, let's just be sure to return them to Charles once you complete it. And if you haven't petitioned before and you want to do it for the first time, I'm going to mute everyone because I hear some background noise.
Thank you.
All right. Can you guys all still hear me? Yeah, making sure I'm not muted, you know. But if you've never petitioned before and you want to join, we're also going to be positioned at Christetti's most of the day Saturday, I think starting at 11 up until the afternoon. And it's always nice if you haven't done it before, you want to go with other people, you pull up a table, it's very easy. The Christetti's, I believe, 26th and 8th. So again, any questions about it, feel free to contact me or post in the chat, or you could always reach out to Charles or Sylvia. So that's my plug. So very excited for tonight's program, and a big round of applause for Stuart Beckerman, our general member, who really did a lot of the heavy lifting to put this program together. It's going to be an exceptionally informative and interesting meeting. I'm definitely excited to learn more about it and have the opportunity to be on it. Our speakers, so obviously Stuart is going to be our host and moderator, and then we've got some great speakers. So Miguel Acevedo is on. He is a member of CRDC, but also the president of the Fulton Houses Tenant Association. We've also got Simon Kowitsky, the vice president of portfolio planning for NYCHA. So I'm reading off my list to make sure I get everyone's titles accurate. And Sarah Watson, the interim executive director for CPHC CHC, which is the Citizens Housing and Planning Council. So I think it's going to be a really interesting night, and we're going to learn a lot. So thank you so much, Stuart, for putting this together, and I'll turn it over to you to get us started. You're on mute, Stuart. I muted everyone. So.
And thank you, everyone,
you
for coming, and thank you to our panelists, Miguel, Sarah, and Simon, for being here. I'm going to say as little as possible. I know people are going to want to have questions, so I'm going to ask that people hold off on questions until all three speakers have completed their presentation. So our, this program, just briefly, is about what truly was a historic moment, in that, as you know, there's been this program over the last few years where NYCHA has been entering into agreements with private developers who've taken over the management and also they've done renovation work on various NYCHA projects in the city. And the program was changed and these buildings went from Section 9 to Section 8 under this particular program that started under the Obama administration. But what makes this, what happened in our neighborhood so unique is that this is like the first time that tenants have been directly involved in the selection process. So I think without any further delay, I'd like to start first with Miguel and to talk about Mikel Acevedo, to talk about, I think many of you know Miguel. Miguel is the president of the Fulton Houses Tenants Association. He was directly involved in this process. But I'd like for Miguel to talk about the process that led to this moment, but also to talk about, I'd like Miguel to talk about his personal involvement as president of the Tenants Association and, the sorts of things that he has seen over the decades, the condition of the buildings, and where we are now and how it got to the point where the tenants were brought into the selection process. So Miguel, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Or am I still on mute or am I off mute?
We hear you.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to, on behalf of myself, Darlene Waters, who was supposed to be here tonight, speaking also, unfortunately, she can't. So I'll be speaking on both our behalves. Me and her agreed from the beginning to the end of this process, so she'll respect my wishes on what I'm saying for both of us. And I want to also thank the club for giving me the opportunity to let others in the community hear what the due process was with this redevelopment that's going to take place at Fulton and Elliott Chelsea houses. First and foremost, in fairness to people who were against this project, everyone has the right to their opinion. There was many people who were protesting, not many, a handful of people who were protesting. It wasn't majority of the residents of either developments that were against the Rat Pack conversion. The Rat Pack conversion started more than 3 years ago. The conversation actually started. I was invited, Darlene was invited to have a discussion from the mayor's office and the city council speaker's office, Corey Johnson, to talk about a conversation on how and what they want to do at Fulton, Elliott, Chelsea to redevelop our developments, because I don't know if any of you or many of you should know, we live in horrible conditions in both developments. The conditions here are where nobody should be living. And in fairness to the New York City Housing Authority, we can sit there and blame the finger to them, but we can blame also the federal government, who hasn't in decades given any subsidies to provide services that need to be done to help these developments stay stable. So going further with that, we then heard about what was going on here. They went on the news to say that this was backdoor deals, that Fulton and Elliott were being sold out without residents having the opportunity to have their voices heard. I'll be the first one to tell you, none of that is true. There was never no backdoor deals. Once I got wind and Darlene got wind, we informed our tenants that it is a proposal and it's only a conversation. to join the Rat Pack conversion at Fulton Houses in Elliott, Chelsea. It went further to a conversation where now was a discussion how we, the residents, can play a role in picking first and foremost who in the end our developer would be, how we would be protected in multiple different ways, how our rents would be protected. And then first and foremost, the most important thing was the discussion that was had of demolishing 2 buildings at Fulton Houses. And none of us, including myself, felt that if that was going to be part of the conversation, then we were not going to support the Rat Pack deal coming to each one of our developments. Moving forward, after that happened, we had conversations with all the elected officials, with NYCHA, the mayor's office, on how we can get tenant participation. So moving on that, we formed what's called a working group. The working group consisted of many residents, led by residents, including me and Darlene, and also many not-for-profits, including the Legal Aid, CPHC, Community Board 4, at these meetings. These meetings were so important that the mayor himself came to one of the meetings. The deputy mayor, Vicky Bean, was almost at every single meeting. Every single elected official that represents our district was at the meetings. If not at all the meetings, there were at a number of meetings. And I'm talking from Gail to Dick Godfrey, to Corey, to our new council member, Eric Boucher. Nadler was even there once. So it was involvement on all different levels. But the most important thing about the levels of where we are, it was all about the tenants first and foremost, to make sure that we were deciding what was going to happen at Fulton Houses and Elliott, Chelsea. And with all due respect, every single elected official supported that and said, if that's what it's all about, then we need to move forward to make sure the best of the best is done for Fulton and Elliott, Chelsea. And it took 2.5 years for us just to have the discussions. I mean, we fought back and forth, even me with some of my tenants were breaking against each other because, we wasn't agreeing on things. In the end of the day, we all came to one solution. We all had the opportunity as residents to pick the developer we felt was best for the future at Fulton, Elliott, and Chelsea. Many of you probably know who the developer is. If not, I'll just put it out there because it's public information, which is related. Many of us felt that we were afraid of it being related because related has so much involvement in our community. But after we interviewed these developers, related had all the answers that we wanted to hear and that we felt it was going to protect us tenant rights. It was going to redevelop this development to be where it should be for the next 20, 30, 40 years from now. And that's basically what it was mostly about. But it was the most important thing, and this is what I want the whole community that didn't know, it was all about the tenants. It wasn't about an elected official telling me, well, you need to do this or you need to do that, or Community Board 4. No, we took advisory from not-for-profits to tell us, they're right, this is what's best. We all agreed that if you're not going to let it be led by the tenants, then we don't want any participation. And that's from the mayor's office down, made sure that it was tenant-led. And the issue with that, in the past Rat Pack conversions, other public housing developments didn't have that opportunity. We created history that the mayor's office and NYCHA let us decide who's going to redevelop, let us lead the meetings that we had for 2.5 years. Even during COVID, we had Zoom calls. Prior to that, we were meeting almost 2 nights a week just to make sure that everything was done correctly.
So thanks, Miguel. And before we go on to the next, I know people can have lots of questions, but I really like everyone to hold off until after all 3 speakers have given their presentations. But I just had one quick question for Miguel, and that is, and I'll have more questions later along with everybody else, and that is, what was it about Related and their team that distinguished them from the others that you were interviewing?
So Related answered our questions directly. you know, and the way we saw it, when other developers came here, they looked like they were beating around the bush, that they just wanted a development to redevelop.
They wanted to build buildings is what you're
Yeah,
saying.
so for example, one developer's proposal was actually to build 6 buildings in Fulton houses, you know, which would have been market rate, mixed income buildings, which we don't have much space to build buildings. And that developer even proposed that would be the way he generates money to redevelop Fulton houses. That was never part of the RFP. One of the things that Related said was the monies that they're going to generate is for the future, not for the present redevelopment at Fulton or Elliott Chelsea houses. They committed to us that they're not going to drop any bricks until everything is completed and every single apartment, every single roof, every single elevator is redeveloped. And they were the ones that were the most committed to that.
Okay, thank you, Miguel. So our next speaker is Simon Kowitsky from NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority, and he's going to talk about, he's actually going to do he's got visuals. So actually, I'll just let Simon take over here.
Thanks so much, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this meeting tonight. I really appreciate it. It's good to be with you all. My name is Simon Kowitsky. I oversee the planning team here at NYCHA. I personally have been involved working with Miguel and Darlene and their neighbors at this project since the middle of 2020, just after the pandemic started. I was not part of all of those really intense in-person meetings that Miguel referenced with the mayor and the deputy mayor. I kind of stepped in after a lot of that really hard work had already taken place. And we were then starting to hash out the details of what the working group would actually be recommending as the strategies to fully modernize these 4 developments. So I've had the pleasure since then of getting to know everyone, and really truly excited to continue to be working on this and realize the vision of the residents. I prepared some slides to just kind of orient everybody to the PACT program and how it works. I also have a little bit more background about the work that we did at Fulton and Elliott Chelsea, the recommendations that the working group put forward, and then ultimately some more information about the proposal that the residents ultimately selected. And if it's okay, I'll go through the slides fairly briskly, but in that order. Let me know, Stuart or others, if you think that makes sense and would be helpful. Or feel free to interject if you suggest any other agenda for my presentation.
This is fine. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. So many of you have heard about PACT. PACT stands for Permanent Affordability Commitment Together. And it's an initiative that was launched in NYCHA in 2016, actually, but actually in 2018, we came up with a plan called NYCHA 2.0 that committed to using this initiative to fully modernize 1/3 of NYCHA's housing stock. That's 62,000 apartments. And PACT leverages a program that was created by the Obama administration in 2012 to raise additional funding for the really important repairs that we need to make here at the Housing Authority. I use the chart on this slide to start these presentations to really kind of demonstrate the situation that we're facing at NYCHA, and really bears out in the experience of our residents. But when you look at this, the numbers truly are staggering. The blue bars here represent the amount of money it would take to fully upgrade and modernize our housing to provide safe, decent, affordable homes for our residents. In 2006, that number was about $6.6 billion. In 2017, it had ballooned to over $31 billion. And today, 2022, we estimate that need to be over $40 billion. The reason that this need has grown so significantly just in the past few decades is really because as the federal government has cut its spending in public housing, we have deferred those really critical upgrades and repairs to our buildings that now is starting to show and actually snowball into a really dangerous state for us and for our residents. And I also include on here the orange bars, which represent, just so you all can understand the gravity of the situation, the amount of money we actually receive from HUD, from the federal government each year to make those repairs. So the gap between what we need and what we get is truly staggering when you visualize it in this way. The RAD program, and again, in New York City, we call it PACT because there are some differences in how or some specificities in how New York City implements this program. It's a program that's available nationwide to public housing authorities, but we implement it in a very specific way, so we call it PACT, we make it our own. Is essentially transitions public housing from one federally funded housing program to another federally funded housing program. So public housing today is funded through what's known as the Section 9 program. The federal government, HUD, provides us operating subsidy to maintain our buildings. They also provide us with some capital subsidy each year, and that's again what's in the orange bars, to make upgrades and really important capital upgrades like replacing boilers and roofs and facades. That funding is subject to allocations from Congress each year. It's really the budgeting process that happens in Congress. And we know that that source has really not kept pace with the extraordinary need that we have. What we do is we transition to another program that, again, is managed by HUD and funded by the federal government, called Project-Based Section 8. And Project-Based Section 8 is important in two ways. First off, it actually is a higher level of subsidy. So for every apartment in the Section 8 program, we get more funding from HUD each year than we do under the public housing program. Another really important feature of Section 8 is that it comes with a long-term contract. So I mentioned public housing dollars are subject to annual allocations in the budgeting process in Washington. Section 8 is a long-term contract that we get, and we can take that to a bank. And that's what allows us to actually raise a mortgage or a loan to make all of the upfront repairs. So HUD approves this whole package in exchange for allowing us to transition to this more lucrative, stable source of funding. Again, it costs them more. So really importantly, they want to understand, or they actually require, that we address all of the documented physical needs, all of the repair needs, all of the upgrades, anything that needs to be replaced in exchange for doing that. And in that way, the repairs and upgrades that we make are truly comprehensive. They're not those replacing a boiler, doing a roof over the course of many years. It's, we need to understand what are all the needs here, and we need to take care of them all at once in order to be approved by HUD to access this source of funding. Secondly, the rights of residents are different in the public housing versus the Section 8 program. But HUD set up this initiative, RAD, to actually grandfather the rights. So residents who are public housing residents who transition to Section 8 through this program have all of the same rights and benefits and protections that they have as a public housing resident in the Section 8. They're like a very special class of Section 8 residents that have these additional added protections, and they benefit from allowing for their developments to be put on a more sustainable financial footing. So different housing authorities implement the RAD program in different ways. And again, we call it PACT because we implement it in a very specific way. Here, it relies on partnerships with private and nonprofit partners. Again, they are selected now with resident input. And they do a number of things. So they're responsible for making all of the upgrades and repairs, the renovations to the developments. They're also responsible for the day-to-day property management of the properties. So the upkeep, cleaning, maintenance, minor repairs, that is all now going to be the responsibility of that private partner. And then we also require, again, because we have additional resources, additional funding coming to these developments in this transition to Section 8, we now have the opportunity to also require enhanced social services. So NYCHA actually used to staff social workers and caseworkers at our developments in a more robust way. We've had to pull back from doing that. This allows us to do that once more. So as part of this initiative, in addition to all the, the enhanced property management and the repairs and renovations, we do require partnerships with nonprofit social service providers who will staff social workers on site and are available to case manage residents and also bring additional amenities and programs to the community. At NYCHA, our role changes. So we don't sell the land. Again, this is not privatization. We lease the land under a long-term ground lease agreement with the partners. And really importantly, we continue to hold the purse strings. So all of the Section 8 subsidy, all that funding flows from the federal government to NYCHA. And then we pass it along to the development partner who, in addition to the rent that they collect, use that money to operate the property. So that's a really important position to be in because if the partners are not performing, we can cut off funding. We also, through all of the agreements and transaction documents that we sign with the partners, we have different avenues of recourse that allow us to take back the control of the property, to step in and replace any property manager who is in default of any of their obligations. We maintain that oversight and ownership. Also, really importantly, because we control the subsidy, we also control the rents. So residents continue to come to NYCHA to certify their incomes. We tell the partners what rents they can charge our residents. Any vacant units that become available, we tell the partners who they can rent those units to. We establish a Section 8 waiting list. So that's essentially, the new setup in terms of how these properties operate following the transition to Section 8. Some examples of the types of investments that we typically make. At Fulton and NYCHA, I'll talk a little bit more about this, but we're expecting to make over $366 million worth of investments across those 4 developments. And they touch everything from the public spaces, the sites and grounds, the playgrounds, the landscaped areas, sitting areas, in the buildings, the lobbies and hallways and stairwells, laundry facilities, something really important that we are planning to bring back and enhance at these developments as well. The building systems, so the guts of the building that keep them running, the boilers and hot water heaters, our roofs and our facades, our elevators and electrical systems, our mechanical ventilation, and then apartments. We'll typically see full kitchen replacement, full bathroom replacement, new flooring, new windows. Again, because this is an opportunity, really a once in a generation opportunity to make such a massive amount of investment in these properties. We're not doing Band-Aid fixes. We can go behind the walls when we're in the units and actually replace plumbing. Those leaks that are leading to mold, those holes in the walls that are resulting in pest infestations, lead and asbestos that is buried in the wall and the flooring. Whenever we encounter those things, we have to abate and remove them. I'll also, something that's not on here, but really important to our residents everywhere, but also at Fulton and NYCHA is security. New cameras, doors, better lighting, security guards. These are all things that are in play for this program. So I mentioned that resident rights and protections are preserved through this initiative. And here are just some of the key ones that are really important to our residents. And really importantly, number one, your rent. So rent is calculated in the same exact way that it's calculated under the public housing program. It's always going to be 30% of your household's income. So that does not change. Our resident associations, and these are all rights that are, again, enshrined in HUD regulations. In exchange for allowing us to access this funding, HUD regulates and requires that we follow these rules. Resident associations have the right to organize, and they continue to receive funding for their operations. All residents, same as in public housing, your lease expires, it automatically renews. You're not rescreened. So a lot of people are worried that they won't qualify for Section 8. Therefore, I'm going to be evicted or displaced. And that's not true. Again, HUD doesn't allow us to screen you. So if you're a current public housing resident transitioning to project-based Section 8 through the PACT program, we don't look at how much money you make. We don't look at your household composition or the size of the apartment that you're in. None of that matters. You get to stay and benefit from this subsidy and the improvements and renovations that come along with it. All of the permissions in terms of allowing allowances for permanent and temporary status of family members continue to remain. Those with permanent status would have succession rights if you move or pass. There are grievance hearing processes that mirror those in the public housing side. And again, because this is a federally funded project, it's subject to what's known as Section 3. So Section 3 requires that 25% of all job hours spent at this development as a result of this work, so that's either in the construction trades, in the management of the property, all have to be filled by NYCHA residents. Here's a map showing where we've been active across the city in implementing PACT. So I mentioned that we have a goal of bringing this program to 62,000 apartments all across the city, and we've been very busy. The first development where we transitioned to Section 8 was in 2016 at Ocean Bay in the Rockaways in Queens. We are now involved with over 35,000 apartments at some stage of the process. So about 15,000 apartments across 58 different developments have already transitioned to Section 8 and are in the process of construction or have already completed construction. And then we're involved right now, and Fulton, Elliott, Chelsea fall into this camp with close to another 20,000 households, where in the coming years, we hope to make that transition and start making those repairs. So overall, about $7 billion at play with the developments that we're currently involved in. I think we're expecting to spend close to about $15 or $16 billion when we're all said and done. Really importantly, before I talk about the specific process we went through at Fulton, Elliott, Chelsea, I just want to emphasize our goals as NYCHA. Of course, number one, we have to stabilize our housing stock. I think we all know the condition our buildings are in, and it's completely unacceptable for our residents to be living in that way. But we also want to use this opportunity to address other more aspirational goals that our residents and communities have around programs, around services, the softer kinds of investments that we can be making. Those can be facilitated by, those hard brick and mortar investments like creating new facilities for community programs or schools or healthy foods or healthcare. Those are all things that we want to think about because we want to make sure that these are long-lasting investments that allow for a better quality of life for our residents. And then lastly, and really importantly for this program or for the initiative here in Chelsea, we really want to make sure that residents have a voice in the process, that they have a seat at the table like our residents here have had. And this is their community. The only reason that we're here doing this is for them. And so they need to be in the driver's seat making decisions. And that process has looked different depending on where we are. But really, we have used and learned a lot from our residents at Fulton and Elliott Chelsea about what the future of that kind of a process can look like. And we're taking what we've learned from them and applying it across all of the projects that I showed you on that map. So just really quickly, I'm almost at the end of the presentation. I don't want to talk too long because I know people have questions as well. And then Sarah's going to say a few words, but Miguel already went over this. There was a working group that was formed in the end of 2019, including residents, elected officials, housing advocates, and community-based organizations from across the neighborhood and the city that all got together to think about how we're going to raise the money that we need to fully stabilize and modernize and upgrade these developments. And all of those strategies that were discussed were kind of compiled into this report that was released in February of 2021. They looked at 3 categories. What are the ways to raise the money? but also how do we ensure that residents have a meaningful say and are participating and engaged in the process, in the planning process. But also, what other rights and protections are there that we want to make sure NYCHA is committing to above and beyond what HUD requires? And how do we truly and really and truly make sure that those protections are going to be maintained and preserved? So this is an overview of what the working group understood to be the capital needs and what we used as our baseline as well in thinking about the capital needs at the development. This is what is needed to fully stabilize these developments. And again, it's estimated right now based on information we have from inspections that were conducted several years ago at this point to be $366 million. This number is absolutely going to go up once our partners are actually on the site and they start to do their own inspections. I have no doubt this number is going to go up significantly. But what this chart is breaking down is kind of where that need is based on the systems of the buildings, in the apartments, the roofing and the facades and the common spaces, the systems like the boilers and the elevators, the public spaces. There was also a commitment that we made to actually decouple these developments from the Con Ed steam system, which has been a source of continual heat outages at these developments over the past years. For those of you who don't know, these developments don't actually have their own boilers where they're making steam that are heating the building or providing hot water. They're plugged into a district-wide system from Con Edison, and the infrastructure on our campuses are very old. So the pipes that convey the steam to heat the units will spring leaks and will burst, and the whole system goes down. So what we committed to doing here, and which is something that we're striving to do at all our developments, is actually decentralizing the heating system. So every building will actually have its own heat and hot water plant that supplies the really critical source of heat to the buildings. The working group looked at strategies to actually raise that money. So how do we raise $366 million? PACT, RAD, is the resource that raises the most money for this development. Over 2/3 of all the money that we need to stabilize these developments would be generated by PACT. And again, that money is realized based on what we know to be a supportable amount of debt that we can raise through that subsidy that comes in from HUD. And then the group looked at other sources. So we know this is a very high value neighborhood from a real estate perspective. The group looked at where there are opportunities on these campuses to create new development, and really the use that stood out as the most high value was residential development, to think about how we close that gap and get to that full $366 million. They also looked at ways to activate retail frontage along 9th Avenue and other places. And then they also looked at other sources of public funding, but ultimately those were much smaller amounts of funding that could support the total package. So once that report was issued, NYCHA worked with residents to actually craft what we call a request for proposals. And I'll say that the Citizens Housing and Planning Council had been involved really deeply in the working group from its very inception, and here played more of a role working closely with us and the residents to make sure that this solicitation, this bid document that went out, would reflect and require respondents to come back with proposals that met the working group report recommendations. Also, again, as Miguel mentioned, for the first time in our history, we actually brought residents into the process of reviewing those proposals and interviewing the teams and making the selection. This is not something that NYCHA has ever done, as far as I know. We worked with CHPC and the resident leaders to create a resident review committee. We went through a process of really digging in and digesting and unpacking those detailed binders that we received from the development teams who were bidding on this project, and weighed the pros and cons of each. And I think it was also really important to have the residents be the ones interviewing the teams. The way we set it up is that NYCHA and the city actually sat in the back of their room. There was a conference table where all the members of the resident review committee sat around a table with the applicant teams, the development partners, and they were the ones that did the interview. We didn't say anything. The way that we selected the teams was we all filled out scorecards, and the resident review committee members filled out scorecards. We had a number of debrief sessions where we talked about how each team did, and ultimately together we selected the Essence and related proposal. So these are the partners who were selected. Essence is a smaller minority led development firm partnered up with Related, both of whom have deep experience in this neighborhood, but also in affordable housing preservation and new construction. And just some highlights of what their proposal included. So again, as part of the PACT RAD program, we require comprehensive repairs to the existing buildings. And so that is in fact what they proposed in their package, including new kitchens and bathrooms and floors and the units and windows, comprehensive repairs to plumbing wherever there were leaks. They've committed to addressing and actually replacing those pipes, not just putting band-aids on them. Complete replacement and upgrades of all of the elevators. Anytime we find mold or lead or asbestos, we would abate it. New roofs, new windows, repairs and upgrades to the facade. They also have proposed including emergency rooftop generators in the case of outages, and also resiliency measures to protect the community in case of storms or other wet weather. But also they, I think, were very surgical in the level of new construction that they proposed. Definitely in comparison to the other proposals that we received, as Miguel mentioned, they only proposed to activate one development site at the Elliott Chelsea campus, actually just adjacent to the Chelsea Addition development. And that was decided based on the working group recommendations. So the working group actually identified a range of different locations across these developments that could accommodate housing. And it gave very specific parameters in terms of how tall those buildings could be, what those buildings could contain in terms of affordable versus market rate apartments. And this proposal activated only one of those sites. I think there were about 6 that the working group said could be activated for new construction, and this team only proposed activating one site. The apartments that were included in their proposal met the requirements of the working group in terms of affordability levels. And really importantly, they committed, not all the teams did this, but they did commit to not beginning construction on any new building until the renovations of the existing buildings were completed. Also, really importantly, again, going back to those other resources and amenities we're trying to enhance at our developments as a part of these projects, they said that they would create a brand new facility for Hudson Guild at the Elliott Center, also create a new early childhood center at the corner of 10th by relocating it into this new facility. They also proposed a really amazing package of new health centers to be located at both the Elliott Chelsea campus and at Fulton. New resident amenities like new expanded lobbies, mailrooms and laundry facilities, and also a really nice proposal to reactivate the public spaces they call an art walk, where there could be passive and active recreation opportunities across all of the campuses. Really importantly, also property management, security was a big focus of theirs. They proposed setting up security kiosks across the developments that would be manned by actual security guards. They would also do patrols and be an active presence on site. New cameras that could be actively monitored as well. They also have proposed to staff, I believe there's 8 or 9, Miguel and others might remember the exact number, live-in supers. So in the case of emergencies, emergency repairs that need to be taken care of in haste, those live-in supers would be there and be able to take care of that. And then lastly, as I mentioned, they committed that 30% of all new hires would be NYCHA residents, and that they would work to train and place NYCHA residents as a priority in any available positions. So that's the end of the presentation. I know that was quite a lot. I'll turn it back to Stuart, and then I think we'll probably take questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Simon. That was very informative. But I know people have questions because I've seen some. So our final speaker is Sarah Watson, who's Interim Executive Director for the Citizens Housing and Planning Council. Full disclosure, I'm on the board of CHPC. I think that's all I'll say. And you may also know that the former executive director, who actually was, when I was originally planning this program, was going to speak, is the mayor's new chief housing officer, Jessica Katz. It's an amazing organization with a great staff. And one of them is here, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. So hopefully we've got resident decision-making firmly at City Hall. So I work for Citizens Housing and Planning Council. We're a nonprofit research organization. We're a civic group that's been around for over 80 years. We actually helped structure the very first public housing in New York over 80 years ago. So we're very happy to be focusing our research work on public housing today. For this project, we have been trying to help use our research work and programmatic support to help the Housing Authority and resident groups start to implement these new processes and this new dynamic. And a lot of it is pulling from our research of how this was done in the UK. You know, really around the world, this has been a global issue about the development and ongoing operation of pure government housing, sort of very consistent issues that have happened in many countries around the world of what happens when you have a restricted revenue and housing gets more and more expensive as it gets older, and then you're just relying on a national subsidy. And exactly the same thing happened in the UK. We had built so much more public housing in the UK. At one point, a third of all of our housing units were public housing by the end of the 1970s. And we hit this real housing conditions crisis. But what's very interesting is sort of what's happening with RAD and PACT here is a very similar process happened in the UK, but around 20, 30 years ago. So it's really ripe for lessons learned, finding out what happened. You know, a lot of it was very similar programs. So I work in New York now, but worked in the UK. We really used very similar programs of conversion from public housing, both to public-private partnerships like PACT, mostly actually full transfers from public housing to the affordable housing providers. That was the most typical, but more recently we've gone more towards public-private partnerships. And really what happened in the UK is a lot of the research we did a few years ago was that there obviously is controversy around the switch from bringing in private investment into these public buildings. And the key goal is still that the residents' needs need to be the priority. Like that's the goal for all sorts of visions of affordable housing, public housing, social housing. So how to make sure that you're continuing to keep the resident needs center while you're bringing in private investment and private players, stakeholders. So suddenly the buildings have not been treated like an asset, and now they kind of do need to be treated like an asset, and that is good for housing conditions, but potentially does have some, some issues associated with it when private investment is involved. So in the UK, they really spearheaded this idea of if the conversions happen, the voice of the residents needs to be elevated. So you're bringing in the private sector to bring their expertise and their resources, but then you also need to bring the resident voice way up. And so around 30 years ago, this was tried in the UK, where residents were made decision makers in a similar way that's being tested here in all these ways. And we sort of have this 30 years of really interesting examples. Not everything worked, but to a place now where actually resident decision making is very commonplace, not only in when these conversions happen in the UK, but for all affordable housing. The residents really are in partnership with affordable housing providers a lot more than happens here. And so we wanted to use our research work to just pull those examples, bring experts from London, which we did just before the pandemic, and just try and support the Housing Authority moving through these sort of similar conversions and try and help them think through and work with them and these new resident groups to make sure that those dynamics are there. You know, we were very involved in the working group process, making sure that the residents' voices were heard and were elevated throughout. And then we've had like an incredibly interesting role trying to facilitate these new processes, seeing how we should shape an RFP if the residents' voice is center. So one example is when NYCHA was just putting these RFPs out for a development and management team, there was very little reference to property management. It was really all about the rehab and financing. Well, these conversions bring the rehab and financing, but then you have a brand new property manager. And it's something that the Housing Authority, the government doesn't necessarily prioritize very much of like, what is the ongoing, basically customer service? What does the repair service look like? Who are the people on a day-to-day basis the residents are involved with? Is something that from the government side wasn't so much of a priority, but once you have the resident voice elevated, it really needs to be front and center in an RFP. I'm sure Miguel can talk some more about that. We worked with the residents to make sure that their priorities, not just on the rehab side, but on the ongoing property management side, were elevated in the RFP, and that we're forcing the affordable housing providers to respond on things like, what are your opening hours for services? What happens if I have a leak at 11 p.m. on a Saturday? The sort of customer facing level is not something that really the government focused on, but it's just an example of something when you start to bring elevation of residents really in this planning process, that obviously is critical. And hopefully that has knock-on effects for actually elevating the ongoing property management for affordable housing in general. And then we helped the residents work through all these proposals, compare what each provider is, what are they proposing, and help to shape what questions they were going to ask the teams when they got there. So we're trying to do this bridge of like really bringing in this big picture research, of which there really are lots of examples of what happens when public housing authorities hit this sort of crisis point, and how to partner with the private sector, but make sure that we're using best practice examples and then implementing them here, as the housing authority really is so open and really wanting to be an innovator in making sure that they actually are doing true community planning.
Okay, are you done, Sarah?
Sure.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think, and I'm going to ask, I think what I'd like to do is just call on people, if that's possible. And I know 2 people have already indicated that they'd like to ask questions, so I'd like to start with them. First, my good friend, Roberta Gelb. Roberta, do you want to ask your question first? Roberta? Oh,
yes,
sorry.
thank you. I do have this question. Paul, you need to mute. I wondered where the residents will live when some of these repairs are being made, because if you're doing asbestos abatement, I don't think people can stay in the apartment. So what has been done, what is planned for these people? Is there a place where they will be able to live while the apartment is being repaired?
Simon,
Yes.
do you want to answer?
Yeah, I can answer that one. It's a good question, and I didn't describe how the renovation process actually would take place. So we strive to do what's known as tenant in place rehab, where the residents, our goal is to disrupt our residents' lives as much as possible. Where possible, we try to allow for residents to stay while the work takes place. But that depends on the kinds of conditions that we uncover in their unit. Also, if the resident has a health concern or needs an accommodation for a disability or another kind of issue, we actually reserve vacant apartments and we renovate those first. So if there is a need to move a resident temporarily while we do the work in their unit, we do have available apartments, we call them hospitality units, where they can go and they can stay for however long is needed. They're furnished. The partner will pay for, you know, any associated costs with moving whatever stuff they need to move. And the type of move or the length of the stay really does depend on the work that needs to take place. So if we're talking about lead paint that needs to be abated and removed in an entire apartment, that could take 6 weeks. And so that would require the resident to move for 6 weeks to another unit. But you know, sometimes it's just that they need to do the plumbing in the kitchen and the bathroom, and so the resident would prefer to have access to a working toilet during the day, and so they can go make use of that hospitality suite as needed. But typically, you know, so there's a larger construction project. Overall, we are seeing these projects take about 2 years for full completion. But the way that the contractors work is they'll go building by building and they'll go floor by floor or line by line. And they'll do each floor, each line in succession. It usually takes about 4 to 6 weeks for them to be done with your apartment, from when they start to when they're going to be done with your apartment, and they can move on. And they can do that by kind of working in phases around your apartment. 1 week they'll work on the kitchen, 1 week they'll work on the bathroom and your bedroom, your living room, et cetera, et cetera. And again, if there aren't any major hazardous conditions or needs of the resident, what they do commit to is making sure that at the end of the day, when they're done doing their work after 5 o'clock, you have running water, you have a working toilet. And so that's typically how it works. But of course, every situation is different. Every resident will have a different need. And so it's up to us and our partner to really consult with the residents in advance and understand what kinds of special needs or accommodations they'll have, and then come up with a really detailed logistics plan to make sure that all the work can proceed in a logical way that is most accommodating to everybody. But it is a construction project and it can get messy. There's no doubt about that there is some pain, but ultimately is worth it.
I have one question, and then I think the next person who asked to ask was, I think, Susan Kenny. I have a question for Miguel. So I know that the first project that underwent this particular conversion was Ocean Bay, and I remember there was a lot of controversy surrounding the, you know, people making claims that there was a higher rate of tenant evictions. I know that this is an issue that you've looked into, and I was wanting to hear what your thoughts are on that, Miguel.
So it's a big issue because people are fear of related coming here and creating evictions, unnecessary evictions, sorry. So one of the things in conversations I have with Legal Aid Society, who represented maybe all the residents at Ocean Bay, they assured me that any eviction that took place was a legal eviction that took place there, because those residents that were evicted, a majority of them were residents that had no rights to the apartments. So for example, if a resident is living here at Fulton Houses and he or she is not a succession tenant able to legally stay in that apartment, that person will be evicted because they have no legal right to the apartment. Ocean Bay also had a number of issues of gangbangers, drug dealing going out of these apartments. So those were legal evictions that took place. We're going to make sure here that if any eviction takes place, and we're hoping no eviction takes place here, that there's no illegal eviction related, and Essence has assured us that will not take place. We will be reviewing every single thing that happens at Fulton Houses.
Thanks, Miguel. So next, Susan Kenny. Susan, are you around?
Yes, I am. Hello, I have a couple of questions to ask, and maybe Simon can call me back during the week and I can speak further to him, but I am seeking a lot of surgeries. I do have a lot of stuff in my apartment that has to be moved. I need help with that. I don't need to get evicted. I need to know if part of this stuff is moved and everything else, where would they put it? And another thing is the washing machine that I had in my apartment. Some of the stuff that was in my apartment, is it grandfathered in, or we can't have it no more? Like the washing machine I had in my apartment, all my hookups, like my television and telephone cables and things like that. What's gonna happen with all that stuff?
Hi, Susan. Well, as we get closer to actually starting to make the renovations, the team will have to be in close contact with you to make sure that, you know, all of your
Right.
stuff is taken care of, but
Right.
and that they have a plan for your things. But generally, yes, all of your appliances, as long as they're permitted now under NYCHA rules, you'll be allowed to keep them.
Right.
And you'll also be getting new appliances in your kitchen as well. But
Yeah, but
your
another
washing machine you can keep, absolutely.
another thing with the washing machine, they're charging us money for the water. They're charging us money for the water and the air conditionings. They're charging us too. But one of mine is broken, and I was trying to get NYCHA to give me a new air conditioning, and they wouldn't do it, and it doesn't work. But if we decide to go use the new washing machines in the facility in the laundry room, is there a charge for that? Is there a card on the rent or something? Because most of the places they charge when they have rent, it's in the rent. It's in the rent. They give you a card, and the money's in the rent to pay for those things, those amenities, or whatever they have to do.
Right. So all the fees and everything will stay the same. We don't allow the partners to increase the fees for having additional appliances or air conditioners. I think there will be a charge for using the laundry rooms, but I don't know what the details are. That's something that we can get back to you on and ask the partners.
Another thing, I can still keep my washing machine in my apartment, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Another thing.
Susan, let me ask you something. So Related has hired an organization that's going to be interviewing every single tenant that lives in these developments. So if there's any needs that need to be addressed, that agency will be taking your information, whether it be a washing machine or furniture or stuff being moved or your health. They're going to interview you. Then later on, after a month or two, all that information will be given to Related. We would be having conversations with them, working together to make sure that your needs are met first and foremost.
Okay, that's fine. That's good. That's good. One more thing, down the line, I'm gonna have surgery down the line, and I hope I'm gonna recover, and then I'll be all right. But this process is not starting yet. It'll be for a while, right?
Not for about a year to a year and a half.
Okay. Thank you so much. But see, Simon, please call me back and keep in touch with me. Please call me.
I remember you from our meetings. We'll do, absolutely.
Thank you.
I also just want to follow up on the question about evictions and just make sure everyone's aware. I put a link in the chat. We recently published data on evictions that happened at PAC developments compared to public housing generally in our portfolio. And so all of that information is there. We made it publicly available. I want to just point out that actually the eviction rate at PAC developments is lower than in public housing generally. Since in the last year or two, actually, we have a partnership with the Legal Aid Society. Miguel mentioned speaking to them about what happened at Ocean Bay. And this is not something that was available back then, but now all residents going through the PACT program have access to free lawyers who work at the Legal Aid Society. They run a hotline and they can at any time call the Legal Aid Society and have a free consultation with them about any issue that they're concerned about regarding their tenancy. Residents have to sign new leases. They're switching from Section 9 to Section 8, so they need to sign a Section 8 lease, which the Legal Aid Society also vetted and signed off on. So any questions that they have or concerns, they can talk to a free lawyer about that before signing their new lease.
Okay, thanks. So next, two questions. One is I have Luana Green, and then Joe Remsen. So Luana,
I have a question also, just in case you didn't see my name up there. I'm sorry.
oh, okay, I'll add you to the list. Okay, so Luana, are you there?
I'll ask one at a time. I'll ask another one another time, give other people a chance to ask a question. So one of my major, thank you so much for that presentation. It was very informative. One of the concerns I have is realty, the realty company. So Related owns a lot of property. Related also was a major developer in the Hudson Yards. And I feel like they're moving east, right? So taking over this property. And I feel like there's a small group of major realtors that are taking over New York and usurping most of the real estate. So when you talk about commercial property, what are you speaking of exactly? Where exactly is this commercial property going to be located? And also the building that is planned to be built on 27th Street, where's that planned to be built? Because it's already crowded in that area, so I'm concerned about that as well. I'll ask the other ones later. Thank you.
So is that Simon, I guess?
Do you want to answer it or you want me to?
Simon or Miguel, who?
Go for it, Miguel.
So the building on 27th Street is going to be built directly behind where the Hudson Gill is now. It's in an area that we felt was big enough to develop a new building there. And remember, there's also going to be a new Hudson Gill, new learning center. That's going to be part of that building. As for
so the senior building is there. So
no,
what's gonna
senior
happen?
building is to the right of that. So if you go, you know that park right behind to the left of Hudson Gill?
The yard?
The yard, that's there, right.
So you're gonna put a building in the yard?
A building will be going up there, correctly. So just to make it more informative for you, we are planning meetings in the next month with residents of all developments to show them the plan that's being proposed. So you can see exactly where it's gonna go, how big it's gonna be, and how long it's gonna take.
So my concern is that it's already, that yard is a yard for the children to play in. It's already a converted yard for a play area. And the building is 2 buildings actually that are connected are right there. Also the driveway and then the park. So you're telling me that you're gonna squeeze a building in between those buildings?
That's the proposal.
And why is that?
That's
What is the need for a new building in that area?
So that building is going to be part of redeveloping Hudson Gill. That building is part of the RFP proposal where buildings can be built in both developments. And we agreed that we will let buildings be built. It also is going to create more affordable housing for Elliott, Chelsea, and Fulton houses.
So I think what you're saying is that there isn't yet a final decision on a plan, but these are issues that will be addressed to the extent that. So this is an active playground that would be displaced, or is it?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
So, but okay, well, I guess there need to be other decisions and considerations.
I'm concerned about the environmental concerns as well, putting another building so close to another building, another 2 buildings and a driveway and a rebuilding of another area that's already the Hudson Gill and the senior housing. That is a concern. It's really a close proximity. They're going to be like on top of each other.
It sounds like this is an issue for future. I'm sorry, go ahead, Miguel. I apologize.
I'm sorry. I'm just,
No, okay. But this is
you
what
can talk about the commercial properties. When you have those meetings, they're going to be advertised, right?
Yeah, they're going to be advertised. Commercial properties, for example, in Fulton houses is going to be on 9th Avenue. So that we have a playground that's going to be brought back somewhat. And on the avenue itself is going to be where the proposal is to put the commercial properties. For example, if you go from 14th Street all the way up to Harlem, if you want, Fulton houses happens to be the only area where there is no commercial real estate, none whatsoever.
Yeah, it also in
And
line.
then the question about Related, you mentioned Related being a developer that's taking much property in our community. That was one of the biggest issues we had, but in fairness to that, when we interviewed the other developers, none of them answered the questions that we want on the redevelopment from Fulton and Elliott Chelsea. And the other thing is, one of these developers' proposal was actually to build 6 buildings at Fulton houses. And his answer was, that's how he was going to create the money to redevelop Fulton houses. As you heard Simon say earlier, our agreement is not until every single apartment, every single issue facing Fulton and Elliott is addressed and fixed before you even think about dropping one brick down to build a new building. And that's why we eliminated him. Related assured us that that will not be happening until every apartment is completed, every public area is completed, every roof is done.
Well, they get a benefit from that because like I said, initially, I don't want to take up all the time, but they already own much property, the whole Hudson Yards, and then they're one of the largest realtors in Manhattan, right, in New York City, along with Mag, along with Bernardo. So they're one of the largest realtors, and they get a benefit from putting a property on NYCHA property, right? NYCHA still benefits because NYCHA is only leasing, so NYCHA is still making money off of the deal while they're selling the property or leasing the property to somebody else who's going to be responsible for the maintenance of the property. And at the same time, they get a deal by putting another building of their own onto NYCHA property.
But it's not, I understand you saying they get a deal, but that is part of the RFP proposal. They didn't create a building that's out of scope for the RFP proposal, first of all. Second of all, you got to also see it twofold. Related has a lot of investment in our community. So for that, they're going to probably they're going to try to do the way I see it and we saw it is that because their investment in Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen today, they're going to make sure that what they do here outshines other places to make sure we become part of the community. Because right now, in all honesty, we look like an eyesore in Chelsea. We can't sit here and say we're not stereotyped because it's public housing. They're looking to make this a place that matches the community. Right now, we don't match this community.
I have to, I'm sorry, disagree with you, Miguel. I've lived here over 50 years. I lived in NYCHA for over 40 years. I don't know what happened to NYCHA since I moved there, when I lived there. But what I'm saying to you is there's a school, there's a nursery school right next to that building where you're planning on building another building. And instead of building a building, enlarging the play area for the school would be more efficient and more effective than putting a building on top of another building. So I'm thinking that the plan needs to be revisited. That's what I'm saying.
No, it's okay. But if you, as Simon explained, the nursery school that is there now today is actually going to be part of the new Hudson Gill.
So anyway, I hate to interrupt.
We can go on for days. Thank you.
And Luana, not just that, I'm sure we'll discuss this issue in the future because it sounds like it's an issue that may reappear in a couple of years. So until then, there are many people who have questions. I think we should try to get to as many of them as possible. So Joe Remsen, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I was just curious. So thank you, Stuart. Let's say, the tenants have picked, so they pick Related, and God forbid something goes wrong. They're not satisfied with the work that Related is doing. What is the format for them to be able to say, you know what, we're pulling the contract or the agreement away from Related and evaluating another option?
Simon?
Well, the deal's not done till the deal's done, right? So we're going to spend about a year to year and a half of planning for this project because they've only just been identified and selected. Now is really the time we have to roll up our sleeves. We have to dig into the conditions at the developments. We have to come up with the renovation plans and pull together the financing. So up until that point where we actually close on the financing and the properties transition to the new management company, nothing is set in stone. And again, as I mentioned during the presentation, after they take over the management of the property and they start making all of the repairs, if they're in default of any of the agreements, NYCHA has the ability to unilaterally replace them. And we want our residents to be happy. Obviously, that's not our goal. We would not like for that to happen, to get to a point where we have to replace a partner that we've been engaging with for so long. But if it comes to that, we have that lever and we can pull it.
Okay, thanks.
So just if I can ask a clarifying question, you're saying NYCHA has the authority to do that. Does that mean the tenants do not?
The tenants
If
do not
after
have the
every-
legal authority to do that, no. But, you know, we want to make sure the residents are happy. If there are issues that they raise, we are going to take them
Yeah,
seriously
understood.
and work to resolve them.
And I would just add that the idea of elevating resident decision-making in this sort of is a testing ground. It's certainly not just resting on the selection of the part of the development team. And again, pulling from things that happen in the UK, like this is residents having a seat at the table, both scrutinizing what is happening on the rehab side and property management, and sort of being able to convey that to the housing authority. So this is sort of a brand new ground where we're sort of helping think through how the processes will be in place for residents to be the eyes and ears of what is actually happening when this scope of work that is going to be agreed by the housing authority and the residents, that, you know, the deal making is going to be agreed by the residents so that the scope is decided. But then in terms of the actual implementation of the scope, you know, the quality of the work, the politeness of the contractors, you know, all of this, the idea of resident decision-making and like really being community planning is that the residents know they've had all the inside information and all the deal details of what the scope of work is, and they're the ones experiencing it. So how can we harness that both expertise that actually public housing residents completely have about how their buildings run, but also the fact that they're the ultimate customers of this work, how we can harness that to be pushing the development team to improve, to continuously improve, both in terms of how the rehab's being done, but also the ongoing operations, and relay that information so the housing authority can use the tenants' day-to-day experience to find out what is really happening on the ground. And I think a lot of that is where, you know, the elevated resident role in all of this can add value to all the players.
So one other thing to add is, remember what Simon mentioned earlier, a percentage of the jobs that are going to be offered to the residents of the developments are going to be property management. So we're going to have insight on the management and overseeing exactly what happens. So it's not like we're not going to be part of everything. We're going to go from the beginning of the scope to the end of the scope of this development to make sure that everything is done correctly. If at any time residents feel they're lying to us or they're not doing it correctly, we will bring that attention to City Hall and to NYCHA to make sure they're not doing exactly what they told us they're going to do. Residents play a big part of everything here.
Thank you, Miguel. So the next question is from Mary Yom Tariq. Mary? Your hand is up, Mary. Mary? Okay, I guess since.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
I don't, yes, we do. Yep.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a couple of questions, right? Now, what kind of Section 8 are we getting?
So this is a project-based Section 8 voucher, and that's different from the Section 8 voucher that most of us are familiar with, where you get a voucher and you can apply to rent an apartment from a private landlord. This works in the same way that public housing subsidy works. The subsidy from HUD is attached to your apartment. Okay. It's not attached to you.
Okay.
Okay. And hold on, I'm not finished. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Simon, I wanted your information. I had your information before, but I think I lost it. May I please get that again? So I can ask you like a personal question later on.
I'll put my phone number and email address in the chat.
Perfect, thanks. Sylvia.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mary. Sylvia, you have a question? Sylvia DiPietro? Sylvia? Okay, I hate to cut her off, but I think Elizabeth Pomalis.
Can you hear me?
I'm sorry,
Yes.
Elizabeth, let Sylvia go. So,
I just
sorry.
want to say thank you to all the people that have come tonight to put on this presentation because Stu, you've done a great job. The speakers have, and this is invaluable information. I hope that this program can continue for Chelsea in the future because this is really a very dynamic interchange. I mean, that we're learning here. And so I did have a question, but Luana did such a great job. We're on the same level that my question is not necessary, but I wanted to congratulate you, Stu, and all the speakers for a great job.
Thank you, Sylvia. Okay, next, Elizabeth Pomalis. Thanks, Sylvia. Appreciate it.
Hi, yes, how are you? I don't know, do you see me? Oh, wait, there we go. Hi,
We see
how are
you.
you? Hi, I just have a few questions. I'm interested in knowing when they do the new boiler things that's gonna be in the building, right, when they change it out, are they changing the radiators in the apartments also? Because we need new ones. These really are bad.
I think Simon actually addressed that earlier. Go ahead, Simon.
Sure. The answer is I don't know.
You discussed it, mentioned it, but-
The team needs to, well, I'm not sure exactly whether the radiators in the units are going to need to be replaced or changed in any way. That's going to be something that the team needs to learn more about and figure out a plan for, because it'll depend on the kind of system upgrades that they make. And
is it gonna, okay, and my other question, I mean, they do need to be changed. They're very bad. Is it gonna be?
You in Fulton? Are you in Fulton, Elizabeth, or are you in?
He's in Fulton. So
I'm in
Elizabeth,
Fulton.
one of the things, Elizabeth, is,
Yes.
for example, what we have here now is high pressure steam that's fed
Right.
to Con Edison. So for example, if your building in building 5 goes out, more than 5 or 6 of the buildings lose their heat and hot
I know.
water. So now what's going to happen, each building's going to have its own boiler and generator on the roofs. So it'll be maintained personally for each building. So the situations we're facing today, hopefully we won't face in the future.
And what I don't know right now is whether they're going to make use of the existing steam pipes to supply the heat to your unit, or if they're going to have to replace the system. So that's why I can't give an answer. But I also just want to point out that the team's going to be going door to door and meeting with every resident to talk through the specific issues and challenges that you're facing in your apartment, so that they can make sure they hit those things.
Excellent.
Okay, I have another question. I'm sorry. Do you know when are they gonna, I'm sorry, when are they gonna start the process in the apartments?
The renovation work
Yes.
or the consultations?
The renovation.
No,
the renovations are not going to start for another probably year and a half from now. And
okay.
that's not
Definitely.
necessarily when it would start in your building. They're going to go in like a phased manner across all of the developments. And so they'll start, you know, in one part of the campus and work their way towards another. So it might be 2 years or a little longer before they get to your unit. It's really hard to say at this point.
Okay, and I don't know, for some reason, there seems to be an issue with, I don't know, it's the piping that they're doing in the outside the building. There was a leak coming in the building. And I noticed that now there's a big like hole on the, what do you call that? Pillar light
Yeah.
outside. Is that gonna get fixed anytime soon, or do you know, Miguel?
Yes. So actually, I spoke with the heating supervisor today. On Tuesday, a team is going to be here to address that leak, and it should be fixed no later than Tuesday evening. By Wednesday, they'll be plastering the wall.
Great.
Thank you.
And I want to say thank you also.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And you have an amazing tenant leader, right?
Why not?
Miguel's amazing. So thanks. So the next.
And now I see that that's changing also. So it's great.
Okay. Next question is from.
Oh, that's it. I'm done.
Thank
I just
you.
want to say thank you.
Next
Okay.
question is from Leila Logisico.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to ask a question. Thank you for a really great and very informative presentation. I have a question actually on the process to hold the developer accountable as the years go by. I think that in the past we have seen that developers do a good job, and the honeymoon period is great, and then things may actually go a different direction. I just wanted to know what kind of safeguards are in place so that the relationship between the private developer and the housing complex remain a satisfying and mutually beneficial one.
Can I just sort of follow up? And this is just sort of refining that question for Simon. I know you've handled a lot of these, agreements with developers. Are there specific provisions that address that constantly appear in these agreements? And, are there, as Leila pointed out, are there safeguards written within these agreements?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a whole other team within the real estate department at NYCHA whose only job is to monitor the performance of our partners. And so they're required through these agreements to submit regular reports to us every month. They tell us what's happening with residents, how many issues that they've addressed in terms of repair or other emergency issues, any resident who is going through an evictions process or anything like that, that would affect their housing stability. And so we can see through their monthly reports what is actually happening, from a data perspective. And they can step in. And again, we've written a lot of different forms of recourse into the agreements to make sure that we can hold them accountable and make sure that they're performing. We also have a team who continues to stay in touch with resident leadership following the transition to private management. As I said, we don't go away. Our residents in our PAC developments are still NYCHA residents. It's just that they're benefiting from this new model, better model. And so they'll continue to be available to consult with resident leaders. Any issues that come up, we can step in and work to resolve them. We can also be available to facilitate elections. I know a lot of residents are concerned about running elections processes for the associations with the private partner. So NYCHA can still be available to facilitate those kinds of things where there's a trust issue with the partner.
Great. If I can just have one quick follow-up. What happens if a developer, private entity decides to opt out of being the manager for the property? Let's say that, in 5 years down the road, Related doesn't feel that, it is part of their business plan and business model anymore, and they want out. Is there a way for them to get out? And then what happens for the management of the property?
Well, one of the important ways that we set up these deals is that they have to put skin in the game. So they can't just walk away. They're in it for the long term because they have to put their own money in. And the only way to get that money out is by continuing to perform according to our agreements. So I don't envision that happening. I'm sure there is something that protects for that. I don't know exactly how we would deal with it. But worst case scenario, the property would just, again, because we own the property, it would come back to us and we'd probably just have to figure out how to manage it and identify somebody else who can take care of it. But I don't think that would happen.
So Sarah, I just have a question.
Thank you.
Sorry, Sarah, I have a question for you. So just following up on that, what's the experience been in other cities which have had a longer track record in this area?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. What happened, the UK basically converted 860,000 units over like a very short, over a 10-year period. So this is hundreds of thousands of units that were switched. And so it transformed the role of the housing authorities to be these like incredible, basically strategic bodies, very close strategic bodies to the housing supply. So, but without this constant burden of operation of buildings where the financing just didn't really work out, and so there was decline, they were able to oversee these properties in a long-term way and use the sort of incentives to make sure that the providers are doing the right thing. So it's actually like a very interesting model of sort of a pure definition of social housing, where the providers have a much more closer oversight to the public sector than regular rental housing. And it was really that sort of new strategic body. So whole entire housing authorities were transferred often fully to affordable housing providers. And then the housing authority within 10 years just became, as Simon's saying, they've been developing these new departments through the housing authority, but like within 8 to 10 years fully became just strategic entities. And so that's why there's so much interesting examples there that we're pulling all the time, sort of doing all these like different toolkits so that the housing authority can pull from them too, of all these different ways to use resident insight as well, to be getting all that information to the housing authorities that were then suddenly pure strategic bodies, and what levers you can use to make sure that the right thing is being done at the right time. So there's, especially on property management level, transparency of a property management metric. So like the housing authority would, instead of just getting information, regular reports from the affordable housing provider, they would also get resident surveys, information on like customer service that the provider's doing for residents. So they would get information from residents. So it was really developing these processes where they were getting customer-oriented versions of the reports on an ongoing basis. Was really, really fascinating transitions that went on with just like so much housing being transferred, and the real shift of these roles of housing authorities, being able to see, well, what is our long-term public sector goals for this housing stock, and how can we make sure that the private providers are doing that through a sort of always a carrot and stick balancing act. And these transfers allow it to be done in a much more effective way than sort of regular public sector oversight of private housing.
Thanks,
I think those are the things that really want to, the housing authorities experimenting with here.
Right.
And it will be iterative, because the more conversions that happen, the more capacity the housing authority will have, more strategic oversight capacity. So it will only improve.
Interesting, thanks. So next question is from Tony Simone. Tony, are you still there?
Hi, thank you for a great presentation. Simon actually answered my question in the chat. I asked about, is there a description of security plans, and was the PSA, the NYPD for the area consulted? And Simon answered in the chat that they'll be talking to the community to come up with a security update plan, and of course, consulting with the PSA. So he answered my question in the chat, but thank you for that.
Thanks, Tony. I know Mary Yamal-Tariq has another question. Mary? Mary? Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions? I see no hands. Oh, I see Luana has another question. Luana?
Yes, thank you. I need a little clarification on the project-based Section 8 and regular Section 8. To my understanding, project-based Section 8 is based on the projects that are being done in the apartments. Is that correct?
So project-based Section 8 is the subsidy that we receive that allows us to make the repairs in your unit. And that subsidy is tied to your apartment. So if you move out, that subsidy wouldn't go with you. It's tied to your unit. Same as in the public housing program, we use that money to maintain and operate your public housing unit. There's another form of Section 8 called the tenant-based Section 8, or we also call it the housing choice voucher. And that's the more traditional form of Section 8 that most people are familiar with, that's when you get allocated subsidy to you as a household, and you can use that to go and rent housing in the private market. That's not what this program is. Again, this is more in line with public housing and how it works, where that subsidy sticks to your unit. There is an opportunity through RAD, which HUD set up, which does allow for residents who transition to project-based Section 8. After 1 year, you can apply to NYCHA to convert your voucher into a mobile voucher, that tenant-based voucher. And it's all subject to the availability of funding. We haven't turned anybody down at this stage, but if you are allocated that mobile voucher, you can use it to move if you so desire. Again, it's completely optional, but it is an opportunity for mobility that public housing residents don't currently have. If you're a public housing resident, you have to get in line for a Section 8 voucher. Here, you get to apply for one after 1 year if you want to move somewhere else. And you can move anywhere in the country that has a Section 8 voucher program. So it's an added benefit, but it's not a requirement. It's completely optional.
I'm sorry. Okay. So how are the rents determined going forward in this program?
So once you transition to project-based Section 8 and the new manager takes over, the rents are calculated in exactly the same way they are today. It's always going to be 30% of your household income. So rent will not change. As long as your income is the same, your rent will not change. You know that if your income goes up, your rent will go up because it's calculated as a percentage of your income. But the way that it's calculated is exactly the same.
I think Mary has another question. Mary?
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I have a question because I asked for a transfer like in 2019. And they told me that recently they told me that they're not doing any transfers because of the new management wants to take the apartments. So I was wondering about that.
Why don't you email me or call me and I'll look into your case. I don't think that is the right response that they should have given you, but let me look into it. I don't want to speak out of turn.
But Mary, may I add to that? So the only thing that's taking place now is any vacant apartments that are at Fulton or Elliott will not be occupied in the near future because we are holding those apartments for model apartments for where tenants need to be moved into while construction takes place in their apartments. So if you're looking to transfer within.
Now, what about the people that need to be moved? Yeah, within. I'm looking to transfer within. I put this in since 2019.
That's
to me, that's not fair.
So I respect and understand that. But the thing is, with the new management team, it's going to be a lot easier for them to transfer you into your right size apartment once it becomes available.
And my thing is, that's a whole nother year. That's gonna be 5 years. I'm waiting for a transfer.
With all due respect, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just being honest. There's people in Fulton houses that have been waiting 15 years to get into a right size apartment. And unfortunate for the way NYCHA runs their program, there's people from the outside of these developments that get the opportunity to get the right size apartments or get a 2 or 3 or 4 bedroom before the tenants that live in Fulton houses. We're hoping with the relationship that we have with the new development team, that doesn't happen. That Mary, that you get an opportunity to go into the right size apartment after development is completed.
And what about now? Waiting in an overcrowded household with repairs that need to be made in here.
The last thing
it's
that
not fair.
I believe you're right on that, but I think the last thing we want, me and Darlene as your leadership, is for you to go to another development. And that's probably one of the things that NYCHA will offer you if you want to relocate to a different development.
I like development.
That's what I'm saying is that right now they can't because everything is on hold.
It was all right yourself, man. Thank you again, Miguel, just for your presence here. I respect you a lot, just so you know that I look up to you with all your information. I look up to everybody in here. But thank you, everyone, for your presentation again. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
So I think if no one who has not asked a question wants to ask the question, unless someone else wants to ask a question, I think we should probably just, Joe, what do you think?
George, can I ask you a question?
Oh,
put
sure.
another-
I'm sorry again.
Yes.
Go ahead, Susan.
One thing, Stuart and Simon, is when this happens, are we gonna get things in writing and everything else when we sign everything and know what's going on?
Absolutely, yeah. You'll get a number of documents. You'll get your new lease, which will really be important in terms of stipulating your rights as a tenant. We're also working on actually memorializing all of the rights and protections that you have in a more formal document as well, that every household would get and is a little easier to understand than like a legal document. So we're hoping that that'll be useful as well.
Two more things, Stephen. You cut me short. Stephen, Simon.
Yes.
One more thing. What is going to happen about the crime that we have in our apartment, like the drug addicts and the trafficking and all that stuff? There was a drug addict in my 16D above me, and they're still running around the building and causing a lot of problems. What happens about that?
Susan, I think you have to bring that up to the PSA4, the NYPD.
I did.
Okay.
I did.
Okay, so what I'll do is
Miguel,
after this,
I did, and it's the same thing. It doesn't get better, and my life is being endangered because I live in the apartment, and they're in my staircase level. They're in my staircase level, and it's kind of dangerous. It's kind of dangerous, and I'm by myself here.
all I and Simon and anybody on this call can tell you, just call 911 as much as you want to protect yourself, because there's nothing that we could do right here today, because we're not living where you're living, but you need to call 911 to protect yourself. Don't wait till something happens. We can't do anything, not that we don't want to do anything, we could just relay your message to the NYPD. That's it.
Okay, all right, I did, but I haven't seen Officer Singh and Officer Kowalski for a while. Officer Singh has been very sick or something, and I haven't seen anybody. And I've been calling.
I have your building address and everything,
Yep.
Susan. I'll reach out to the NCOs after this meeting and to
Okay.
tell them to take do a vertical of your building tonight.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it, Simon. Give me a call. Thank you, Miguel. You have my information.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Miguel.
Thank you.
Sounds like Miguel and Simon are available to, answer any questions afterwards. They've made themselves available. Thank you, Sarah, for your, and CHPC's involvement.
Thank you.
And I think everyone, I hope, has enjoyed this evening.
Thank you.
Learned something. I know I did.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
Thank you again, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you again to Simon, Miguel, and
Have a
Sarah.
good evening, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Night, Miguel.